It may surprise many to learn that some of the profound visions attributed to Sister Bernadette seem to be echoing into the year 2025 with a clarity that's difficult to overlook. What once felt like distant, cryptic messages whispered through the ages now carry an urgency that speaks directly to the hearts of those paying attention. These once obscure revelations have taken on new weight, causing many to pause and reflect on what they might truly signify. Once seen as mystical and symbolic, her prophetic glimpses are now capturing the imagination and concern of both faithful believers and curious scholars. But what exactly did this young girl from France witness, and why do her experiences now feel so closely tied to the times we're living in? Right now, comment Sister Bernadette, blessed for lifelong blessing of peace, protection, and spiritual clarity. As we venture deeper into this remarkable story, one question stands out. How could a girl from a quiet corner of 19th century France possibly offer insights that mirror the complexities of our modern age? Stay with us as we explore the powerful visions of Sister Bernadette, whose humble life gave rise to a spiritual legacy that continues to stir hearts and minds to this day. Throughout history, many have claimed to be messengers of divine truth, but few have left behind a message as enduring and thought-provoking as that of this modest young visionary. While she is often remembered for her breathtaking spiritual encounters, her story stretches far beyond those miraculous moments. The messages she received, once spoken of in hushed tones among believers, are now being re-examined with a renewed sense of urgency, especially as the world grapples with rising uncertainty, shifting values, and spiritual unrest that touches people across all walks of life. Bernadette's life, simple and unremarkable on the surface, becomes even more astonishing when one considers the depth of what she shared with the world. Born into poverty and lacking access to proper education, she had no formal theological background, yet she became the bearer of messages that continue to puzzle and inspire even the most learned minds. How was it possible that someone with such limited worldly knowledge could foresee events and speak truths that still resonate today? That mystery alone has fueled decades of reflection, debate, and awe. As more people revisit her words, one cannot help but wonder. Was Bernadette granted a window into the future, or was she delivering a kind of timeless wisdom that only now, in our current moment, humanity is truly beginning to understand? Now, let's turn to the extraordinary life of Bernadette Soubirous, the quiet soul from the town of Lourdes whose path was marked by hardship, simplicity, and an unwavering faith. She came into the world on January 7, 1844, in a modest home tucked in a small village in southern France. The eldest of 9 siblings, Bernadette grew up in a household where every day was a struggle to survive. Her family faced severe poverty, and she herself battled poor health for most of her childhood. Education was a luxury they could not afford. She was only taught the bare essentials of reading and writing. In her early years, she worked as a shepherdess, spending long days alone in the countryside, tending sheep, gathering firewood, and helping her family however she could. To those who met her, Bernadette appeared no different from countless other rural children, quiet, dutiful, and bound by the rhythms of village life. No one could have guessed that her name would one day be known around the world. But everything changed on a cold February morning in 1858. At just 14 years old, while collecting firewood near a hidden grotto called Massabielle, she had an encounter that would alter the course of her life forever. There, in that secluded place, she witnessed a figure bathed in radiant light, an elegant woman dressed in white, glowing with an unearthly brilliance. Although overwhelmed by awe and confusion, Bernadette was not afraid. She felt enveloped in an unexpected peace, a calm that defied the strangeness of the moment. When she later recounted the experience, she described the figure as a young lady, choosing simple, respectful words for something far beyond her understanding. That moment marked only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, she returned to the grotto again and again, experiencing a total of 18 apparitions. Each time, the luminous woman appeared and delivered messages, some comforting, others calling for reflection and prayer. Though the content of the messages remained private at first, Word of Bernadette's experiences began to spread beyond her village, attracting attention from the faithful and the skeptical alike. Suddenly, this quiet girl from Lourdes found herself at the center of a storm. Some people believed she had truly encountered the divine, while others accused her of seeking attention or imagining things. The growing curiosity turned into a media frenzy, and even church authorities became involved. But Bernadette remained calm and unwavering in her story. Then came a revelation that deepened the mystery. During one of the visions, the figure finally disclosed her identity, declaring herself to be the Immaculate Conception. That single statement stunned those who heard it, for the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception was highly complex and only recently defined within the Church. How could a girl with no theological training even know the term, let alone its meaning? Among the many powerful messages received by young Bernadette during her encounters, one theme stood above all: the importance of turning the heart back to the divine. Her visions emphasized a return to spiritual values, a plea for people to embrace faith, renew their trust in a higher power, and devote themselves to prayer and compassion. A deep spiritual urgency ran through every word she shared, especially when it came to interceding for others. She was called to encourage prayers for those who had strayed from a life of virtue, urging everyone to believe in mercy, not judgment, to trust that divine grace was available to all who genuinely sought it. Yet, despite the beauty and hope wrapped in these messages, Bernadette's story was not met with immediate acceptance. Instead, it sparked waves of resistance, and she became the target of intense scrutiny. Local authorities were quick to intervene. She was questioned repeatedly, interrogated by police who seemed determined to find inconsistencies or uncover motives beyond her humble claims. At the same time, many church officials hesitated to lend her their support, cautious of being misled or associating with something they did not fully understand. Her lack of education, her poverty, and her youth made it easy for them to doubt but difficult to ignore. What stood out most was her quiet strength. Bernadette never changed her story, never tried to embellish or appease her critics. With a calm, steady voice, she spoke only of what she had seen and heard. There was no ambition behind her words, no desire for fame or reward. On the contrary, the attention brought her hardship. If anything, she stood to lose everything: her peace, her privacy, even her reputation. One moment in particular left an indelible mark on those who followed her story. During one of her visits to the grotto, the radiant lady who appeared to her gave her a strange and unexpected instruction. She was told to dig into the ground. Bernadette, confused but obedient, did as she was told. As she clawed at the earth with her hands, a trickle of water began to emerge from the soil. What began as a muddy spring soon became a flowing source of clear water. That spring would later be associated with inexplicable healings, both physical and spiritual, and soon, thousands of pilgrims began to arrive, drawn by the reports of its miraculous nature. Yet behind the physical healing lay a deeper message, a call to cleanse the soul, to return to purity, and to trust in the mysterious yet compassionate workings of the divine. But why do her visions continue to resonate with such intensity, even more than a century later? Why do so many feel her messages were not just for her time, but for the age we are living in now? As we journey further into Bernadette's story, we begin to uncover not only the comfort she offered, but also the caution. Her revelations were filled with both light and warning, gentle encouragement mixed with urgent concern for the spiritual direction of humanity. As time went on, her story only grew in influence. Pilgrims poured into Lourdes, drawn not only by tales of healing, but by the sense that something sacred had truly taken place in that small village. Many who touched or bathed in the water claimed their illnesses vanished, leaving doctors and skeptics alike unable to explain the transformations. These growing reports only deepened the belief that Bernadette had been chosen to deliver a message far beyond her years and circumstances. What had started as a personal, private experience for a young shepherd girl began to blossom into one of the most significant spiritual events in modern religious history. By the year 1862, just 4 years after Bernadette's first vision, the Catholic Church officially declared the apparitions at Lourdes as authentic. This decision was monumental, not only because it validated Bernadette's account, but because it signaled to the world that something truly sacred had happened there. The humble grotto where she had once knelt in the quiet shadows now stood as a radiant symbol of hope, drawing millions from across the globe. Over time, Lourdes became more than just a place, it became a beacon, a sanctuary where faith was renewed, prayers were lifted, and hearts were healed. But beyond the physical healings and the deep sense of peace people found there, Bernadette's visions contained other elements, ones that scholars and spiritual seekers continue to explore with fascination. These were not only messages of devotion, but also reflections on the future. According to many who studied her experiences, she spoke of a time yet to come, an age when belief would be tested like never before. Her descriptions painted a world veiled in confusion, where moral boundaries would begin to fade, and deception would creep into everyday life under 1,000 disguises. She spoke of an era in which humanity would struggle to hold on to truth amidst the noise of worldly distractions, where people would be pulled away from the light, not through violence or force, but through subtle seduction and illusions that promised fulfillment but left the soul empty. Some interpret these words as warnings about cultural and spiritual decay, signs that society might drift so far from its core values that even the idea of sacredness could become lost. She described forces that would rise, not always with faces, but with influence, ideas, trends, even systems that would confuse the hearts of many. To this day, many believe these warnings align with what we now see around us. The growing fragmentation between communities, the rise of ideologies that blur the line between truth and opinion, and a spiritual weariness that leaves many searching but unsure of where to turn. Among these cautionary elements, one stood out more than the rest: a great deception, one so powerful and pervasive that it could mislead countless souls. Whether viewed as a figure, a movement, or a way of thinking, this deceptive influence would be global, wrapping itself around every part of human life and gently leading people away from their deeper spiritual instincts. Speculation abounds about what Bernadette may have truly seen. Some suggest she caught a glimpse of a future leader or voice who would rise in a time of confusion, spreading ideas that appear enlightened but lead to moral drift. Others believe her message was symbolic, pointing to the slow, creeping influence of values that disconnect people from compassion, humility, and inner peace. Regardless of how her words are interpreted, what cannot be denied is their increasing relevance. With every passing year, her warnings seem to grow louder, not in volume, but in resonance, echoing through the choices and changes of our time. So, what did Bernadette truly witness in those visions? What was the nature of the great illusion she described, and how might it speak to the spiritual challenges we face today? These are the questions we will continue to explore as we unlock more of her prophetic journey, one that began in a quiet village and now stretches far into our world's unfolding story. Lourdes, once a hidden corner of France, has become a destination of deep spiritual importance. The grotto, once known only to a handful of villagers, now welcomes millions, some searching for physical miracles, others simply hoping to find clarity, comfort, and a renewed connection with their faith. The mystery, however, is far from over. For those who journey to Lourdes, whether in search of healing or simply yearning for a deeper spiritual encounter, there is often a shared experience, a quiet transformation. Visitors speak of an unmistakable tranquility that washes over them the moment they set foot in that sacred space. It's as if the air itself holds a reverent silence, a stillness that speaks to the soul. Many describe an overwhelming sense of peace, as though they are standing on ground where heaven once touched earth. It is not merely the miracle stories or the holy spring that draw them in, but rather a lingering presence, something unseen, yet undeniably powerful. Despite the worldwide attention her visions eventually attracted, Bernadette herself never desired recognition. Fame and admiration were of no interest to her. She remained deeply rooted in humility, the the same humility that had defined her before any apparition ever occurred. While others spoke her name with reverence, she quietly stepped away from the spotlight. At a young age, she made a profound decision to leave behind the noise of admiration and enter the quiet life of religious service. She joined the Sisters of Charity in Nevers, France, retreating into a convent far from the growing legends surrounding Lourdes. Within those convent walls, Bernadette dedicated her life to caring for the forgotten and the suffering. She tended to the poor, the sick, and the weak with the same gentle heart that had once knelt in prayer at the grotto. Though the world outside marveled at her visions, she asked for none of the praise. Her heart remained focused not on what had happened in the past, but on living a life of compassion in the present. Her days were filled with service, not spectacle. Quietly, without complaint, she fulfilled the duties entrusted to her, never seeing herself as special, but as a simple woman answering a divine call. Her health, however, had always been fragile, and as the years passed, illness returned with greater force. Tuberculosis, which had shadowed her childhood, began to take a heavy toll. Pain and fatigue became her constant companions. Yet even as her body grew weaker, her spirit remained unbroken. She accepted her suffering not with bitterness, but with grace. She never cried out against the hardship she faced, nor did she question its purpose. For Bernadette, pain was not a punishment to be resisted, it was a sacred offering. She saw it as a way to draw closer to the divine, to join her suffering with that of others, and lift it up as a silent, unseen prayer for the world. Even in her final moments, she held firm in her faith. She believed without doubt that her visions were real, that her purpose had been fulfilled, and that every challenge she endured had served something far greater than herself. And though her earthly life came to a close on April 16, 1879, when she was just 35 years old, her legacy was only beginning to unfold. The world remembered her not only as the girl who saw a radiant lady at a grotto, but as someone whose unwavering humility, sincerity, and faith had touched millions. In the years following her death, Bernadette's story continued to inspire hearts around the world. Her life was not one of ambition or spectacle. She had no desire for power or recognition. What made her remarkable was not the attention she received, but the way she remained unshaken in her devotion, living her truth quietly and faithfully. Her path was never one of grandeur, it was the path of one who simply listened, obeyed, and trusted. And in 1933, decades after her passing, the Catholic Church formally recognized her sanctity by canonizing her as a saint. This momentous act not only honored her life, but affirmed the impact of her spiritual journey, a journey that continues to resonate to this day. The small grotto in Lourdes where her story began was forever transformed. No longer just a cave in the countryside, it became one of the most revered pilgrimage destinations in the world. Millions began to travel to this sacred place, hoping to encounter even a fraction of the grace Bernadette had witnessed. The spring she had uncovered through simple obedience became a symbol of hope. Thousands claimed to experience healing, physical and spiritual alike, through its waters. Doctors and scientists from around the world came to investigate, and many left bewildered by recoveries they could not explain. The Church, in response to these astonishing reports, initiated thorough investigations and eventually recognized 70 cases as official miracles, cases where medical reasoning could offer no answer, but faith could. Yet what truly makes Lourdes extraordinary is not just the miracles of the body, but the transformations of the soul. People arrive with burdens too heavy to carry alone: grief, doubt, fear, or a longing for purpose, and leave with hearts uplifted, having found peace in the silence of prayer or the quiet of contemplation. Lourdes has become a place where the sacred and the ordinary meet, where the weary are welcomed, and where even those who do not share the Catholic faith have found solace and meaning. It has become a destination not just of healing, but of reflection, renewal, and connection to something greater. Bernadette's story reshaped the meaning of pilgrimage itself. No longer was it simply about traveling to a holy place, it became about the inward journey as well. A pilgrimage to Lourdes became an invitation to rediscover one's own spiritual identity, to realign the heart with values long forgotten, and to open oneself to transformation. Her life showed that you didn't need status, wealth, or brilliance to be chosen. Sometimes it is the quiet, unseen soul who carries the greatest message. Even beyond the healings and the serenity of Lourdes, there remains another aspect of Bernadette's legacy that continues to stir interest: the deeper, more prophetic messages embedded in her visions. While she is most often remembered for her encounters with the Virgin Mary, there are those who believe her role extended far beyond those initial apparitions. According to some who studied her closely, Bernadette may have carried insights about the future messages, not just for the 19th century, but for generations yet to come. In recent years, a particular focus has been placed on the perceived connection between her revelations and the year 2025. While it's true that Bernadette herself never explicitly referenced this year in her recorded statements, many who have explored her testimonies note eerie parallels between her warnings and the events unfolding in our world today. She spoke of a time of spiritual struggle, of widespread confusion and deception, of the fading of moral clarity, and of a society searching for light in a darkening world. For many, these descriptions feel uncannily similar to the world we now inhabit. As Bernadette entered the later years of her life, she largely withdrew from public attention. But within the convent, it is said that she continued to receive private revelations, visions she shared only with a select few. Unlike the earlier messages that focused on repentance, prayer, and divine grace, these later revelations reportedly touched on broader global themes. Among them was one phrase that has captured the imagination of many: "There will be a great awakening, a time of trial, but also of grace. The world will tremble, but faith will be restored." For some, this speaks of a coming spiritual renewal. For others, it sounds like a clear warning that humanity is nearing a pivotal moment. In an age marked by rapid change, environmental crises, moral uncertainty, and increasing disconnection, her message rings louder than ever. Could it be that Bernadette was granted a glimpse of what lay ahead, not just for individuals, but for the entire human family? And if so, what are we meant to learn from it? These are the questions we will continue exploring as we unlock the final layers of her extraordinary legacy. In the next part, we'll dive even deeper into Bernadette's later visions and examine how they may offer insight into the spiritual crossroads of our time. Don't miss what comes next, because her words may hold more relevance now than the world ever imagined. Among the most striking dimensions of Sister Bernadette's visions was the way they invited not just contemplation, but personal transformation. Her messages were not designed to instill fear, they were a call to awaken. A mirror held up to humanity, urging reflection, accountability, and change. While her warnings about the natural world have drawn much attention, her insights extended far beyond environmental concerns. She spoke of a future not defined by bombs or armies, but by a more subtle and dangerous threat: division, seeded through words, through confusion, and through the erosion of trust. She described a coming time when people and nations would not rise against one another with weapons, but with speech fueled by mistrust and contempt. It would be an era, she suggested, in which the most damaging wounds would not be inflicted by violence, but by rhetoric and deception. And in this, many believe, Bernadette foresaw the spiritual challenge of our modern age, an age in which information travels faster than truth, where opinions can become weapons, and where societies splinter under the weight of misunderstanding and manipulation. As the year 2025 draws closer, scholars and believers alike find themselves reflecting on the eerily precise nature of her foresight. Today, the world feels more polarized than ever. Cultural divisions grow deeper, common ground feels harder to find, and public trust once placed in institutions meant to serve is increasingly fragile. Misinformation spreads unchecked, blurring the lines between reality and fiction. It's within this backdrop that Bernadette's voice, long silent, begins to echo once more. Her vision of confusion clouding clarity, of voices leading people astray under the guise of wisdom, seems almost prophetic in the digital age. And yet, despite the gravity of these concerns, Bernadette's revelations were never centered solely on darkness. Unlike many who predict only doom, her messages carried a profound undercurrent of hope. She spoke not only of the trials the world would face, but of the renewal that would follow. In the deepest part of the night, she believed, there would always be a dawn. The turbulence and confusion would not last forever, they would serve as a preparation, a refining fire through which people would rediscover their spiritual roots. From the ashes of uncertainty, a revival of faith would rise. She envisioned a moment, a turning point, when people, disillusioned by materialism and weary from crisis, would begin to search once more for deeper meaning. This spiritual resurgence, she hinted, would not be confined to those already devout, but would touch even the hearts of those who had long abandoned their belief. In regions where faith had faded, she foresaw communities gathering in unity, in prayer, and in reverence, rediscovering the power of connection to something greater than themselves. One of the more mysterious elements of her prophecies is the mention of a figure, a chosen soul, who would rise during a time of profound global distress. Not a ruler, not a celebrity, but someone humble, unknown, and sincere. This person, she implied, would possess a spiritual clarity capable of awakening others, not through grand speeches or political power, but through quiet strength and unwavering conviction. Some interpret this as a literal individual, someone yet to emerge, possibly in the very year we now approach. Others believe Bernadette was speaking metaphorically, pointing toward a movement, a wave of awakening that would rise from among ordinary people, uniting many in pursuit of truth and spiritual purpose. No matter how one interprets this chosen figure or movement, her message is clear. In every age of darkness, there will be light. There will always be voices, quiet and unassuming, that guide others back to love, to clarity, to compassion. She never presented the future as hopeless, but rather as a tested journey that would call each soul to choose between division and unity, confusion and truth, despair and faith. As we examine the state of the world today, with environmental instability, emotional exhaustion, and social fragmentation, it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore the similarities between our reality and her warnings. People everywhere are seeking answers. They're questioning what matters, rediscovering values long buried beneath distraction and conflict. Could it be that Bernadette, through her visions, was offering guidance not just for the people of her own time, but for ours? The idea of 2025 as a pivotal year has gained traction among those studying her life. Though she never directly named this date, the signs she described, moral confusion, environmental turmoil, societal unrest, mirror are present in startling ways. And perhaps even more importantly, so does her call for renewal. She spoke of hearts returning home, of communities finding healing through shared faith, of personal reflection becoming the doorway to global restoration. In this context, her prophecy becomes not just a warning, but a lifeline. An invitation to return to the values that strengthen the human spirit, to the humility that binds us together, to the quiet strength of prayer, compassion, and service. Her message was never about perfection, but about direction. About turning back, even after wandering far. Her vision of environmental collapse was not only a prediction of rising seas and burning skies, but a metaphor for what happens when humanity loses touch with its own soul. She warned of a world groaning beneath the weight of neglect, not just of nature, but of the heart. Today, many are beginning to see the connection between environmental stewardship and inner healing. The rising interest in sustainability, mindfulness, and simple living reflects the very transformation she foresaw. People awakening to a deeper, more respectful relationship with both the earth and with each other. At the same time, her warnings about division continue to unfold with unsettling clarity. Across the globe, conversations are strained, differences are amplified, and communities fracture over ideology and identity. Bernadette foresaw a time when the spoken word, once a source of truth and connection, would become sharpened, weaponized, twisted into tools of manipulation. She described a future in which truth itself would be contested, not by the absence of knowledge, but by an overwhelming flood of conflicting voices. And yet, she also offered a way forward. In her vision, truth would prevail, but only through humility, honesty, and the courage to listen. Unity, she believed, would not come from agreement, but from mutual respect and a shared yearning for peace. Her message speaks loudly to our time, calling us not to fear the battle, but to engage it with grace. Not to lose ourselves in noise, but to find stillness. Not to abandon each other in confusion, but to reach across divides with empathy and faith. According to Bernadette, every challenge contains within it the seed of transformation. Even the greatest trials can become turning points, opportunities to rediscover what truly matters. Her vision wasn't about the end of the world. It was about the renewal of it. And she placed that possibility in the hands of each person because, as she believed, the power to change the course of the future doesn't rest in the stars or in fate, but in the choices we make today. As we continue exploring her remarkable prophecies, we are left with deeper questions. Could her visions hold the key to understanding not just the struggles of our time, but the pathway forward? Is the confusion of today a prelude to the awakening she described? In the next part, we will dive deeper into Bernadette's teachings on truth, spiritual resilience, and the promise of renewal. We will explore how her vision of a world divided by words also reveals the possibility of healing through unity, prayer, and compassion. Join us as we continue to uncover the hidden meaning behind Sister Bernadette's extraordinary revelations and what they may reveal about the future of humanity, now standing at a spiritual crossroads unlike any other. In a world that seems to evolve faster with each passing day, where uncertainty has become a constant companion and the weight of global challenges presses more heavily than ever, one aspect of Sister Bernadette's visions continues to shine with unshakable clarity: her unwavering faith and hope. Despite the turbulence she foresaw, despite the warnings of environmental distress, spiritual disconnection, and social fragmentation, her message was never one of final defeat. Instead, it was a call to renewal, a gentle but powerful reminder that healing and transformation are always within reach, even in the darkest times. She believed that adversity was not meant to signal the end of humanity's journey, but rather a moment to pause, reflect, and rediscover the essence of what truly matters. The trials she described were not punishments, but awakenings, interruptions that force individuals and entire societies to reassess their values, to recognize how far they have drifted from compassion and integrity, and to find their way back to a more spiritually grounded path. Her vision was not about despair, but about what can emerge from it: a deeper faith, a renewed purpose, and a restored sense of unity. As we stand at the threshold of 2025, her words carry an even more urgent resonance. Bernadette seemed to foresee a time when the very foundation of modern civilization would be tested, not simply through physical hardships, but through moral and spiritual upheaval. Yet in every prophecy, she offered a thread of redemption. She insisted that the human spirit was not so fragile as to be broken by these storms. Instead, she believed that through perseverance, humility, and spiritual clarity, people could endure the fires of hardship and come through them refined, strengthened, and transformed. A recurring theme in her revelations is that of spiritual renewal, a revival not born from comfort, but from challenge. She foresaw a moment when the distractions of materialism, self-interest, and division would collapse under their own weight, prompting a collective turning inward. People, she suggested, would no longer find satisfaction in shallow pursuits, and instead would begin searching for a deeper connection to the divine and to one another. The suffering of that time, though painful, would serve as a spiritual invitation, a wake-up call to embrace faith, compassion, and shared humanity. And through this awakening, not only would individuals find peace within themselves, but the world as a whole could begin to heal. Among the more enigmatic elements of her visions was her mention of a great deception, a spiritual test unlike any before it. Bernadette described a time when humanity would be misled not through force or violence, but through subtle persuasion and manipulation. She spoke of a force that would present itself as light, as wisdom, even as progress, while slowly leading people into confusion and disconnection. Unlike traditional prophecies that point to dramatic upheaval, hers was more nuanced. This deception, she warned, would seep into everyday life, changing the way people perceive truth, challenging the very foundations of moral clarity. Many who have studied her life and prophecies believe that this deception could represent a cultural or ideological movement, one that promotes distorted ideals under the guise of enlightenment. It would not arrive with chaos, but with a quiet, persuasive voice offering comfort in place of conviction, ease instead of depth. Words would be twisted, truths inverted, and falsehoods cloaked in intellectual respectability. People would be encouraged to follow what seemed logical and convenient, even if it led them away from virtue and faith. And the most alarming aspect? This transformation would be so gradual that few would even notice it happening. Yet Bernadette's prophecy was never meant to instill fear. It was a call to vigilance. She believed that in such a time, discernment would be the most precious gift a person could possess. She urged people not to accept ideas blindly, no matter how appealing or widely accepted they seemed. Instead, she called for prayerful reflection, a return to inner stillness, and the pursuit of spiritual wisdom. She reminded humanity that truth is not always found in the loudest voice, but often in the quiet conviction of the heart. And she promised that those who remained rooted in love, humility, and moral strength would not be misled, even if the world around them fell into confusion. Her vision offered hope even within the deception. She spoke of those who would not be shaken, individuals who, through unwavering faith and clarity, would act as lights in the fog. Though the deception would spread widely, she emphasized that it would not overcome those who remained spiritually grounded. The darkness, no matter how far-reaching, could never fully extinguish the light of truth in a heart committed to goodness. In this way, Bernadette placed tremendous trust in the resilience of the human soul. She believed that while every generation would face its own trials, each would also carry the potential to rise above them. Her prophecies also held a deep message of unity, a conviction that, though conflict may arise, it would not have the final word. She foresaw a time when division would dominate the landscape, divisions between cultures, ideologies, and even families. Yet she also believed that these divisions could become bridges, that through hardship, people would be drawn back together, rediscovering what binds them rather than what separates them. She envisioned a time of rebuilding when broken relationships would be mended, when misunderstandings would give way to forgiveness, and when communities would find common ground rooted not in uniformity, but in shared humanity. This message feels especially vital now, as the world stands at a crossroad. Are we being pulled further apart, or are we being invited to come together in a deeper, more meaningful way? Are the challenges we face signs of collapse or opportunities for rebirth? Bernadette's words challenge us to reflect not just on the state of the world, but on the state of our own hearts. They ask us whether we are choosing fear or faith, apathy or action, despair or hope. Her message is not bound by religion, nor is it confined to one era. Whether viewed through the lens of spiritual tradition or philosophical inquiry, her insights speak to the core of what it means to be human. They remind us that in every moment of uncertainty lies a choice to fall into bitterness or to rise with courage, a choice to isolate or to connect, a choice to surrender to despair or to live with faith. And so, as the world edges closer to 2025, a year that many now associate with a time of great change, we are left with a profound question. Will we allow these trials to divide us, or will we use them to build something better? Will we lose ourselves in confusion, or rediscover the strength of unity, truth, and shared purpose? Bernadette's vision was not about predicting dates or forecasting doom. It was about transformation, about choosing to respond to hardship not with fear, but with integrity, and about believing that within every storm lies the seed of a brighter dawn. She believed that even in an age of deception, truth remains. Even in a world fractured by division, unity can be found. and even in times of great suffering, the light of faith can never be extinguished. In Bernadette's vision, the trials of the present were never meant to scatter people further into isolation. Rather, she saw hardship as a divine invitation, an opportunity not to divide, but to unite. She believed that adversity, though painful, could become the very spark that draws people closer to one another, encouraging compassion where there was indifference and building bridges where there were once walls. Her message echoes across generations. Even in a time of disconnection, healing and togetherness are not only possible, they are essential. She described a future where that which had been broken could be mended, and that which was lost could be found again. This image of renewal, of scattered hearts being gathered and divided souls finding unity, resonates deeply in an age where conflict and confusion often overshadow peace. Bernadette's prophecy was not a bleak forecast of irreversible decline. It was a roadmap toward transformation, a call for humanity to shift course not through fear, but through love, faith, and mutual understanding. Her belief was steadfast. Even the darkest night holds the promise of dawn. Perhaps the most compelling element of her prophecies lies in her enduring belief in the human spirit's ability to transform. She did not see the approaching difficulties of the future, particularly those tied to the year 2025, as the end of the road. Instead, she described them as a moment of collective awakening, a time when people would be forced to pause, reassess their priorities, and rediscover their deeper purpose. Her warnings, while sobering, were never without light. She believed that the challenges ahead could be met not with despair, but with faith and action. Where others might see chaos, Bernadette saw possibility. Her vision stands in contrast to many apocalyptic narratives, which dwell on destruction without redemption. She spoke not of ruin, but of renewal. She believed that hardship could refine the soul, making it stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her message was that suffering, though difficult, was never meaningless. It could be the very tool through which transformation is born. Those who had lost their way, she said, would find a path back, and those seeking truth would be guided by a light not of this world. This spiritual awakening would not be driven by external events alone, it would begin within the heart. According to Bernadette, real change would come not just through dramatic shifts in the world, but through the quiet revolution of the soul. As people turned away from material distractions and worldly anxieties, they would begin to rediscover timeless values: faith, kindness, humility, and unity. And in doing so, they would not only heal themselves, but also contribute to the healing of the world around them. Her prophecies extend beyond the miraculous waters of Lourdes. While those events offered physical healing and divine reassurance, her deeper message continues to speak to people seeking direction in a world clouded by uncertainty. Bernadette's voice has become a compass for those who feel lost, offering wisdom, not only to the faithful, but to anyone yearning for clarity and truth in a time of upheaval. Her legacy is no longer confined to the grotto where it all began. It now lives in the hearts of people across the world, people who are grappling with questions, carrying burdens, and searching for light in confusing times. As the world confronts a wave of simultaneous challenges, ecological, social, and spiritual, Bernadette's vision becomes more relevant with each passing day. Her words gently challenge us. Will we let these difficulties divide us, or will we use them as opportunities to rebuild what matters most? She taught that the answer lies within us. The choices we make in the face of trial will shape not only our own lives, but the future of our communities and perhaps even the course of humanity itself. The crossroads we now stand at is not a dead end, it is a turning point. And Bernadette's wisdom reminds us that no matter how chaotic the world may seem, hope still burns bright in those who choose to carry it. She believed that testing times did not signal the weakening of faith, but its purification. Faith, she said, is not a treasure meant for times of ease. It is the torch that guides us through the storm. In her view, it is precisely when the world is unsteady that we must stand firm in what we believe. The power of belief, when rooted in truth, could not only survive adversity, it could thrive because of it. Among her most haunting prophecies was the warning of a great deception, a period in which many would be misled, not through obvious falsehoods, but through distortions disguised as truth. She envisioned a world where people would be drawn to teachings and leaders that seemed wise, comforting, and enlightened, but in reality would steer hearts away from virtue. This deception, she cautioned, would not come with fear and force, but through charm, logic, and persuasion. It would appear beautiful, even noble, but underneath it would sow division and confusion. This illusion, she said, would not simply change what people believed, it would alter how they saw the world, how they judged right from wrong, how they measured value and truth. It would be subtle, slow, and widespread. And perhaps the most dangerous part of all, it would feel comfortable. It would be easy to accept, easier still to follow, especially for those who had grown tired, disillusioned, or spiritually numb. Yet, even in this, Bernadette's voice was not one of fear. It was one of courage. She reminded the faithful that deception, no matter how strong, cannot overpower discernment rooted in prayer and virtue. She urged people to remain alert, not in paranoia, but in spiritual readiness. The truth, she said, would remain visible to those who truly sought it, not in noise, but in silence, not in power, but in purity, not in trends, but in timeless wisdom. She foresaw that those who remained steadfast would endure, and that the deception, however vast, would not last forever. There would come a time when the illusion would fade, and truth would shine once more with undeniable clarity. Her message was not one of doom, but of responsibility. For in Bernadette's eyes, the future was not something fixed or fated, it was something shaped by free will. She placed tremendous trust in the decisions of individuals. Her prophecy wasn't about the inevitability of collapse, it was about the possibility of awakening. She believed that while hardship may be unavoidable, what comes next is determined by how we respond to it. Will we retreat into fear or rise with faith? Will we choose division or unity? Her words suggest that this is where humanity's true power lies, not in controlling what happens, but in choosing how to face it. This call to responsibility isn't just personal, it is collective. She spoke of entire communities, even nations, rediscovering the strength that comes from shared purpose. She believed that those who once stood opposed would find ways to meet in understanding, that those who were scattered by difference could be drawn back together by compassion. As 2025 approaches and questions about the future grow louder, people around the world are turning back to her words. Not out of fear, but out of hope. Her prophecy is no longer seen just as a warning, it is seen as a guide, an invitation, a reminder that while the world may tremble, the soul can remain firm. In Bernadette's vision, two roads stretch before us, one paved by fear, division, and confusion, the other illuminated by truth, courage, and unity. Her message is simple but profound. The choice is still ours. Every act of kindness, every prayer uttered in sincerity, every moment of forgiveness brings us closer to the path of light. The world may face many storms, but those who anchor themselves in truth will not be moved. In the next part, we will explore how Bernadette's call for inner strength, moral clarity, and spiritual perseverance can serve as practical guidance for today's world. As we walk deeper into her revelations, we will uncover how her timeless wisdom can help individuals prepare their hearts and minds not only for the days ahead, but for the choices that shape the soul itself. Although Sister Bernadette never framed her revelations in the language of politics or worldly institutions, she described what she saw as a spiritual struggle, a hidden battle not waged with weapons, but within the heart of each person. In this unseen war, the greatest danger would not be physical destruction, but the quiet erosion of truth. She warned that many would grow comfortable in confusion, accepting illusions simply because they required less effort than seeking the light. Those who do not seek the light, she once suggested, will be content to remain in the shadows. Her words served as a sobering reminder. Deception often succeeds not because it is powerful, but because it is convenient. This vision has drawn comparisons to broader themes found in religious traditions around the world: a time of testing, a spiritual trial where discernment would be the greatest challenge. Though she did not mention specific figures by name, some interpret her warnings as symbolic of a force long foretold in prophecy. A deceiver, not always a person, but a spirit of confusion and influence that appears to bring unity and enlightenment, yet in truth leads many away from their spiritual roots. Bernadette spoke of a voice persuasive, beautiful, convincing, that would promise clarity while slowly dismantling the foundations of faith. This force would present itself as progress, cloaked in wisdom and compassion, yet its true aim would be to blur the line between truth and falsehood. Even in this unsettling vision, however, Bernadette never surrendered to despair. She believed with all her heart that those who sincerely searched for truth, who prayed for wisdom, who lived with humility, would not be deceived. Her message was clear: deception has no hold on the soul that remains awake. She taught that through prayer, honest reflection, and the quiet strength of discernment, individuals would be able to recognize when they were being led astray. She never portrayed the future as a world consumed by darkness, but as one where truth would continue to shine for those willing to seek it. She envisioned a world in crisis, yes, but also a world awakening. A world where those who had forgotten their spiritual foundations would feel a pull back towards something eternal. She described crowds gathering in prayer, not in fear, but in longing. People turning their eyes back toward the heavens, searching for a peace the world could no longer offer. History has shown that in the midst of great storms, hearts often return to faith, and Bernadette believed this time would be no different. Her visions suggested that the healing to come would go far deeper than the physical body. She spoke of a healing of the soul, a renewal that could only be born from hardship. In her prophecy, trials were never punishments, they were invitations. Invitations to rediscover compassion, to reconnect with one another, to strengthen the bonds that fear and pride had frayed. She believed that through faith, people would not only endure the hardships of the time, but rise above them, more united, more humble, and more compassionate than before. For those who take her words seriously, the question becomes, how does one prepare for such a time? Bernadette's answer was not rooted in fear or survival tactics, but in spiritual readiness. She urged people to nourish their inner life, to deepen their relationships with others, and to sharpen their discernment. She advised that those who stand on the side of truth, who stay rooted in what is right, will not be shaken even when the world around them trembles. She encouraged a life of prayer, not as ritual, but as connection. She emphasized that wisdom would be given to those who sincerely ask for it, and that clarity would come to those who live with integrity. Her message was that spiritual preparation was both personal and communal. She envisioned neighborhoods, families, and faith communities coming together in solidarity, supporting one another through trial with kindness, courage, and compassion. She foresaw a future where the strength to endure would come not from power, but from love. Not from knowledge alone, but from a heart that listens to the voice of truth. Bernadette's vision painted a clear picture. The world is at a fork in the road. The trials she spoke of are not punishments, but calls to choose. Will people give in to fear, division, and the allure of false peace? Or will they rise, hand in hand, guided by faith, truth, and the quiet certainty that love is always stronger than confusion? As the shadows of uncertainty stretched across the horizon, Bernadette's visions shifted toward something deeper in awareness, not just of the trials that would challenge the world, but of the interior battle each soul would face in silence. Her revelations, often misunderstood as mere glimpses of global transformation, were in truth deeply personal. She did not merely describe what would happen in the world around us. She offered insight into what would unfold within us. In this part of her vision, the focus moved away from dramatic signs and cosmic symbols and turned instead to the quiet and often overlooked struggle that occurs in the human heart. She described a time when people would be surrounded by options, voices, and distractions, yet still feel profoundly empty. This emptiness, she warned, would not be caused by material poverty, but by a spiritual disconnection so subtle that many would not realize it had taken root until they were fully lost in it. She spoke of a kind of spiritual fatigue, a weariness of the soul, brought on by the relentless pace of the modern world, the pressure to conform, and the growing tendency to prioritize appearance over authenticity. In such a time, she said, people would become more concerned with how they are perceived than who they truly are. The danger of this illusion was not its visibility, but its familiarity. People would grow so accustomed to living disconnected from their purpose that they would forget what it meant to truly live. But in this very warning, Bernadette offered a glimpse of hope. She believed that spiritual exhaustion could become the seed of awakening. When people began to recognize that they had traded depth for convenience and substance for surface, many would start to search for something real again. The awakening would not begin in grand temples or public spectacles. It would begin in solitude, in quiet moments when the heart begins to ask uncomfortable questions. Who am I when the world is silent? What remains when everything external is stripped away? This part of Bernadette's vision spoke directly to the hidden pain of modern humanity, the longing for meaning. She foresaw a time when people would rediscover the sacred in the ordinary, when the divine would no longer be sought only in rituals or sacred places, but would be encountered in the act of forgiveness, the courage to speak truth, the strength to resist bitterness. These small, seemingly invisible decisions would become the defining moments of the era. She believed that the return to faith would not be forced, but chosen, born out of deep hunger for authenticity in a world full of noise. She also saw that the greatest form of deception would be self-deception, the slow fading of personal responsibility. Many would blame the world for their loss of hope, never realizing that the flame of faith is kept alive by the quiet discipline of daily choices. Bernadette warned that people would grow addicted to comfort, numbing themselves with distractions that offer quick relief but rob the soul of depth. The great danger, she said, would not be the presence of evil, but the absence of reflection. But there would be those who resisted. Individuals who, though tempted to follow the crowd, would pause, who would choose silence over noise, stillness over spectacle. She saw them not as saints or heroes, but as ordinary people with extraordinary resilience. These were the ones who would, through humility and perseverance, become beacons for others. They would not shout or argue. Their strength would lie in peace. In a fractured world, their calm presence would offer clarity to those overwhelmed by confusion. In this part of her prophecy, Bernadette emphasized the importance of anchoring one's life in truth that does not shift with the tides of culture. She foresaw a world where values would become negotiable, where right and wrong would be redefined to suit comfort and convenience. She described a generation that would inherit this moral fog and feel lost within it, not because they lacked intelligence or opportunity, but because they were never taught how to listen to the voice of conscience. That inner compass, she said, would grow quiet unless nurtured. However, even in this silence, she promised it could be restored. She described moments when people would stop mid-sentence, mid-step, overwhelmed by a sudden awareness that they had wandered too far. And it would not take an angel or a miracle to bring them back, just a moment of honesty. A moment of remembering that they were made for something greater than distraction and division. In this moment, many would weep not out of fear, but from the realization that what they were searching for had never left them. It had only been buried beneath layers of noise. One of the most moving parts of this vision was Bernadette's belief that reconciliation would begin in unexpected places. She spoke of former enemies embracing, of strangers sharing burdens, of families long divided finding their way back to one another through shared prayer and silence. This was not idealism, it was the result of spiritual hunger finally being acknowledged and fed. She believed that when people dropped the masks and spoke with honesty, grace would rush in like air into a breathless room. She also saw that the youth, those most disillusioned by the state of the world, would play a central role in this awakening. Though many would initially turn away from faith, seduced by empty promises of fulfillment through status or self-indulgence, they would reach a breaking point. In that breaking, they would begin to ask deeper questions. She described young people who, after years of searching, would return to prayer not because they were told to, but because nothing else satisfied. These new seekers would not be bound by tradition alone. They would seek relationship with the divine, a living encounter that could not be manufactured or faked. Communities would slowly begin to transform, not through grand reforms or loud declarations, but through quiet acts of love, generosity, and integrity. Bernadette envisioned entire neighborhoods where people once divided by fear would find unity in faith. They would become sanctuaries not just for worship, but for healing. Places where the lonely would be welcomed, the broken would be embraced, and the lost would be reminded that they still belonged. She warned, however, that the temptation to return to complacency would always remain. This renewal, once begun, would need to be nurtured carefully. The world would continue to offer distractions, but those who had tasted the peace of truth would not so easily be lured away again. They would become guardians not of institutions, but of hearts. Their role would be to remind others, not through words but through example, that love still heals, that truth still matters, and that faith still saves. As this part of the vision draws to a close, it leaves a quiet challenge for all who hear it. Will you join those who seek in silence or be lulled by the comfort of noise? Will you dare to ask hard questions or drift with the current of the crowd? The battle Bernadette spoke of does not rage in cities or governments. It happens each morning when a person chooses between self and sacrifice, between appearance and truth, between fear and faith. In the quiet spaces between Bernadette's most vivid revelations, there were glimpses of something few had expected, visions not of destruction or divine spectacle, but of endurance. She described moments when the world would seem stalled in tension, neither collapsing nor healing, but suspended in a strange stillness. This spiritual pause, as she foresaw it, would not be an accident. It would be a season of hidden grace, a time when humanity would be given one final chance to listen before choices once delayed would become consequences lived. It was during this subtle interlude that she saw the rise of those she referred to as the Watchers, not in a mystical sense, but as individuals who would recognize the signs others overlooked. These were people who, in the stillness of that pause, would begin to feel a stirring in their spirit, an awareness that something had shifted beneath the surface of daily life. The world would appear normal to the untrained eye, bustling cities, glowing screens, and endless distractions, but underneath, a quiet unraveling would have begun. The Watchers would not wear special robes or speak in prophecy. They would be mothers folding laundry with prayers in their hearts, farmers whispering ancient hymns to the soil, children asking questions no one could answer. Their strength would not come from intellect, but from attention, from their refusal to look away from the signs others dismissed. They would begin to notice the subtle misalignments, words that sounded hollow, institutions that operated without soul, beauty drained of meaning. And though they would speak softly, their presence would carry weight, because they had not fallen asleep when the world dimmed its lights. This period, Bernadette suggested, would be marked by a strange contradiction. On the surface, people would speak of progress, technological advancement, global connection, a celebration of innovation, but beneath, there would be a growing ache. A sense that the soul of humanity had been bartered away in exchange for temporary convenience. It wouldn't be a loud crisis, but a quiet decay. People would go through the motions of life with increasing detachment, unsure of why joy had become so fleeting. She spoke of this time not as a catastrophe, but as a slow drifting, a turning away so gradual that most wouldn't notice until they were far from shore. But it was in this drifting that the Watchers would begin to move. Not in protest, not in resistance, but in preparation. They would begin to cultivate something the world had forgotten: interior strength. While others sought refuge in noise, they would seek silence. While many escaped into distraction, they would return to the essential rhythms of faith, simplicity, and kindness. Bernadette saw that these individuals would not be praised. They would often be misunderstood, even ridiculed. Their values would be called outdated, their choices seen as foolish. Yet they would continue, not in defiance, but in peace. because they knew what was coming not through fear, but through discernment. They understood that when the veil lifted, when the moment of decision finally arrived, it would not be strength of opinion that mattered, but strength of soul. In this vision, she described communities slowly forming not bound by ideology, but by shared longing. These were not grand gatherings or movements built on charisma. They were small clusters of souls drawn together by something unspoken. People who had once lived isolated lives would begin to find each other. Their meetings might take place over shared meals in whispered prayers or in the quiet unity of doing good without applause. These communities would become sanctuaries not to escape the world, but to preserve what the world was forgetting. They would begin to rebuild values from the ground up, not by enforcing them, but by embodying them. Integrity would become more than a word. It would become a way of walking, a way of speaking, a way of waiting. These people would learn again how to carry burdens together. They would rediscover the healing power of presence, the strength found in listening without judgment, in giving without condition, in standing firm without growing hard. Bernadette believed that these seeds of renewal would begin to take root while the rest of the world remained unaware. And when the larger systems began to shake, when what was trusted failed, and what was celebrated collapsed, these hidden sanctuaries would remain. Not because they were stronger, but because they had been built differently. While others had constructed towers of success, they had been quietly laying foundations of peace. In this phase of her vision, she also hinted at something mysterious, what she called the awakening of memory. A strange and sudden clarity that would come to people in the most ordinary moments. She described a woman kneeling in her garden, suddenly overwhelmed with a memory of childhood prayers long forgotten. A man stuck in traffic, feeling an inexplicable urge to forgive someone he had not spoken to in years. A teenager, scrolling through a screen, unexpectedly weeping at the sound of an old hymn. These awakenings would not be orchestrated. They would rise like smoke from a hidden fireproof that the divine had never left, only waited. Bernadette warned, however, that not all would respond to this inner awakening. Some would harden. When the illusions cracked, they would reach for more illusions. When the truth was revealed, they would cover their eyes, preferring comfort over conversion. But even this, she said, was part of the process. For only in such contrast could the depth of each soul's longing be tested. Only when every false promise had failed would the heart recognize what was truly enduring. She saw that many would come to a crossroads, not through crisis, but through an unexplainable restlessness. Everything they had built would still stand, and yet something would feel hollow. And in that hollowness, a question would echo: is this all there is? For those who dared to follow that question, the path of return would open. This path, she insisted, would not be easy. It would require sacrifice not of wealth or status, but of ego. It would call people to abandon the need to be right, to control, to dominate. It would invite them instead into humility, into honesty, into the slow and often painful journey of becoming whole again. But those who walked it would find a joy that no pleasure could mimic, and a strength that no storm could shake. As this part of her vision came to a close, Bernadette left behind no specific map, no dates, no figures, no grand events. What she offered instead was a mirror, a still, silent reflection that asks not what will happen, but who will you be when it does. As the final pages of Sister Bernadette's journey unfold, we are left not with a clamor of spectacle, but with the still, steady pulse of conviction, a quiet truth echoing through time. Hers was never a mission of grandeur, never a story crafted for fame. It was the testimony of a soul who chose surrender over recognition, obedience over comfort, and faith over fear. Her legacy, now etched into the hearts of millions, does not end at the grotto in Lourdes, nor even within the canonization that came years after her death. It lives on, quietly and resolutely, in the choices people make every day to listen, to believe, and to return to what matters most. Bernadette's visions never promised an easy future. They did not paint the world in idealistic tones or suggest that the path ahead would be without trial. On the contrary, she foresaw moments of confusion, seasons of moral darkness, and stretches of time where truth itself would seem to vanish beneath the noise of human pride. Yet her revelations never settled in despair. Even when she spoke of deception, division, and spiritual weariness, it was always with the steady assurance that light would not be extinguished, that redemption was never beyond reach. Perhaps the most enduring gift she offered was the reminder that spiritual strength is not born from certainty, but from sincerity. Her story teaches us that holiness is not found in perfection, but in perseverance. That greatness is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to keep believing when the world grows quiet and heavy. Bernadette walked her path with humility, accepting both suffering and solitude without resentment. And in doing so, she revealed the quiet power of a life lived with purpose. Now, as the modern world hurtles toward an uncertain future, her words ring with fresh clarity. We face crises of conscience and identity, of faith and unity. Technology has connected us more than ever, and yet loneliness has become a silent epidemic. Voices crowd our ears, telling us who we should be, what we should want, and how we should measure our worth. But Bernadette's message cuts through all of that. It calls us to simplicity, to stillness, to the unshakable truth that beyond every trend, beyond every ideology, beyond every moment of distraction, there is a deeper voice, one that speaks not to the mind, but to the soul. Her story is not one we visit and then leave behind. It's a call to action, quiet, yes, but insistent. She asks us not to wait for signs in the sky or miracles to break the silence. She asks us to be the signs, to live with compassion, to speak with integrity, to act with courage when truth is unpopular, and to show mercy when others choose judgment. In her own hidden life, she became a light in the dark, not by doing what was easy, but by doing what was right. Even now, long after her final breath, the ripples of her faith continue to move outward. The grotto in Lourdes has not lost its power. It remains a refuge for those who come weary, broken, or unsure. But perhaps even more importantly, her message has traveled far beyond that place. It lives in the hearts of those who choose forgiveness over revenge, patience over panic, and hope over cynicism. Every person who kneels to pray in silence, every soul who dares to believe that goodness still matters in a fractured world, is continuing her mission. So what are we to do with her vision? This mosaic of mystery, warning, and invitation. It is not enough to admire her faith from a distance. The real challenge is to carry it forward, to make space in our lives for what truly matters, to disconnect from the noise long enough to hear the whispers of conscience, to stop chasing validation, and instead root ourselves in values that withstand the winds of time. As 2025 begins, many will speculate. They will search for signs, draw connections, and question what comes next. But if Bernadette taught us anything, it is that the greatest revelations are not given to the powerful, the loud, or the well-educated. They are entrusted to the humble, to those willing to kneel in the dirt, to wait in silence, to listen not with the ears, but with the heart. Her prophecy is not a prediction of doom, it is a roadmap back to the soul. It invites us to rediscover prayer, not as ritual, but as relationship. To approach faith not as a duty, but as a wellspring. To remember that the smallest act of love, the quietest moment of surrender, can change everything. Her visions may have begun in a forgotten grotto, but their fulfillment lies within each of us, within every moment we choose light over darkness, truth over deception, and peace over division. We are not called to be Bernadette, but we are called to be awake, aware, and aligned with the same courage she lived by. To recognize that the greatest miracle is not found in the water of Lourdes, but in the transformation of a willing heart. So let this story not be an ending, but a beginning. Let it inspire action, not apathy. Let it awaken something long buried beneath doubt and distraction. Bernadette's journey has reached its conclusion, but yours has not. Her voice falls silent here, only so that your own may rise. because the world still waits for people who will love without condition, speak without fear, and believe without needing to see. If her story has moved you, let it guide you. Let it shape your choices. Let it remind you that in a world full of noise and shadows, the light still shines for those who choose to follow it. Thank you for joining us on this profound exploration of Sister Bernadette's life, her visions, and the deep spiritual truths she offered to the world. If you believe her message deserves to be heard by more hearts, help us continue this journey by subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, and sharing this video with someone who might need it. Together, let us carry the light forward.